Okay, so get this. We're diving into the creative economy today, and you guys really went all out on the source material this time.
Yeah, it's quite the stack.
We've got articles, chapters from some seriously dense books, even notes on the folks behind it all. So we're going deep into what makes creativity tick.
Absolutely. And not just from the usual economic angle.
Right, so it's not just about the money.
No, we're looking at how value gets constructed in this world, from personal journeys to cultural contexts, even those hidden networks that drive creative success.
See, that's what I love about these deep dives. I mean, just glancing at the material, there's this silent design thing happening in furniture factories. I'm super curious about that.
Fascinating stuff. And we'll be looking at how certain cities like Leicester become these creative hubs and how online gamers are turning their communities into thriving businesses.
Oh, and don't forget textiles. Kente cloth from Ghana, for instance. It's worth so much more than just the threads it's made of.
It embodies history, culture, tradition.
Yeah.
We'll see, it's a whole other level of value.
Okay, I'm hooked. But first, let's back up a bit. When we say creative economy, what are we actually talking about?
Well, it gained traction in the late 20th century when people realized creative industries were this major engine for economic growth. Think about those trendy areas in London like Tech City or Manchester's Northern Quarter. They're buzzing with creative energy, attracting talent and investment.
Right, but like you said earlier, it's more than just the economic side. There's this chapter by Pinky Pizzazz about creative degrees that really got me thinking about how we measure value.
Ah, yes. Bizaz points out this conflict. Do you judge a degree based on potential earnings, like what the LEO survey does, looking at future salaries? Or do you consider the individual's values, what they find truly fulfilling?
So it's like maybe a creative degree won't make you rich, but it could bring a different kind of wealth.
Exactly. It highlights the subjective nature of value in creative fields, which really challenges those traditional economic models. And speaking of challenges, Jenny Jordan and Ruth Jindal's work on philanthropy in the UK cultural sector adds another layer to this.
They talk about this give, get, or get off mentality that was part of the Leadership for the Future program, right? It was all about encouraging individual giving to the arts in the UK.
And that approach clashed head-on with the traditional UK view of arts organizations as social merit goods. I mean, they're seen as something the government should support, not something you donate to. Remember that statistic?
Oh yeah, 8 out of 16 organizations in that program reported zero, absolutely no, contributions from individuals. Talk about a culture clash. It really shows how differently people in the UK and the US think about funding the arts.
It's about more than just fundraising techniques. It's a fundamental difference in perspective. But let's shift gears for a bit and dive into something else that's really captured my attention. The ways in which value is created that we often don't even notice.
You mean that silent design concept? I have to admit, it sounds a bit like something out of a spy movie. But the Furniture Factory case study by David Heap and Caroline Coles really brings it to life.
It's amazing how value emerges from these unexpected corners. Think about it. Shop floor workers, quality controllers, they're all contributing to design innovation simply by doing their jobs, solving problems, making tweaks based on their experience.
Like that story about the chair with the misaligned jig. That one blew me away.
Perfect example, right? An unspoken solution leads to an unintentional design change, and suddenly the final product is improved. These are the unsung heroes of the creative process.
Makes you wonder how much awesome stuff is happening right under our noses outside the realm of those designated designers.
And it raises some interesting questions about intellectual property, too. Can it truly capture all the valuable creations of the mind, especially in a world that's increasingly embracing open access and digital sharing?
Wow, so much to unpack there. Okay, what else is jumping out at me from this pile? Oh yeah, this research on hidden networks and the power of place. This sounds fascinating.
Rachel Granger's work on the creative economy in Leicester really exposes the blind spots of those traditional data mapping methods, like Nesta's Creative Nation.
Yeah, they seem to miss those vital micro businesses and all the informal connections that really make the creative scene thrive.
Granger calls it relational geography, moving beyond just physical location to consider those webs of trust, reciprocity, and shared experience that truly shape creative practice. And you know what's interesting? A full 76.9% of creative practitioners in Leicester are graduates.
But hardly any of them have formal collaborations with the local universities, so how are they making those connections?
Informally, of course. It's those networks, the ones that often fly under the radar of a data collection, that are absolutely crucial to shaping a city's creative landscape. They're a vital part of how value is generated and disseminated.
It's like those unspoken connections you see everywhere in our neighborhoods, our workplaces. It's fascinating how much creative value stems from those casual exchanges.
Precisely. Now, let's step into a world that's both tangible and deeply personal, textiles. We'll be exploring how value becomes woven into the very fabric of these materials.
And we've got some great sources to guide us. Claire Lerpenier's perspective on sustainable textiles and Malika Kramer's research on kente cloth in Ghana. They really highlight how textiles are so much more than just something we wear.
Think about the sensory experience of textile creation, the weight on the squeegee, the tension of the warp yarn. These descriptions reveal a depth of knowledge and skill passed down through generations.
It's that human touch, that connection to tradition and heritage that gives textiles a value you just can't measure in dollars and cents.
Exactly. Take kente cloth, for instance. In Ghana, its use is carefully regulated, often linked to royalty and social status. The cultural context adds this whole other layer of meaning and value.
Wow, it's incredible how a single piece of cloth can hold so many different forms of value. Makes you think about the hidden stories behind the clothes we wear, the everyday objects we use. Where do they come from? What do they signify?
Such an important point. And it leads us to this movement called slow fashion, which is pushing back against those unsustainable practices of the fast fashion industry. It encourages us to consider the social and environmental impact of what we produce and consume.
So our obsession with cheap, trendy clothes actually comes at a cost, right?
Hmm.
There's a hidden price tag in terms of unfair labor, resource depletion, and undervaluing true craftsmanship.
Absolutely. But hey, let's not dwell on the doom and gloom. We have another exciting facet of value creation to explore, the world of online gaming communities.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. The research by Tracy Harwood, Jason Boomer, and Tony Geary on Let's Play Gamers shows how social, economic, and even symbolic value all converge in this digital space.
You have these individuals who are passionate about gaming, connecting with others online, expressing themselves creatively, and what's fascinating is that by doing so, they're actually transforming social interaction into tangible business value.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So just by sharing your love for gaming, they can actually generate economic value. But how does that actually work?
It's a multi-layered process. You have the personal stories of these gamers, their motivations, the various types of value they seek, social connection, creative expression, and yes, even economic success.
And then their content, their engagement becomes monetized through advertising, merchandise sponsorships.
Precisely. And we can't forget about symbolic value. The language they use, the symbols, those inside jokes, it all contributes to attracting and motivating their audience.
It's like they're creating their own world, their own space where everyone's in on the joke, part of the community.
And that sense of community is crucial. In fact, the research showed that for these Let's Play gamers, social value is the most universally sought after.
That just reinforces the power of community and connection, especially in this creative landscape we're exploring.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes creating value isn't about personal ambition or profits. It can be about shared passion, about wanting to connect with others and build something meaningful together. And that brings us to the end of part 1 of our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground from questioning those traditional economic models to uncovering the hidden networks and personal stories that fuel value in the creative economy. But don't go anywhere. We're just getting started. In part 2, we'll be delving even deeper into these fascinating topics and seeing how they all connect to paint a richer picture of value in the creative world.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the creative economy. We really laid the groundwork in part 1, exploring all these different ways value is created.
Totally. We talk about how those old ways of measuring value just don't cut it anymore. And those secret networks that help creative people thrive. Plus all those personal stories behind things like textiles and gaming communities.
Right. It's about so much more than just the bottom line.
I'm ready to go deeper. Feels like we've only just scratched the surface.
Me too. So let's pick up where we left off and dive back into Rachel Granger's research on the creative scene in Leicester. Her work has some really thought-provoking stuff in it.
One thing that really stuck with me was her story about Ben Revilius, this guy who's like an unofficial tastemaker in the creative community. What's that all about?
It's a great example of how those hidden networks we talked about actually function. Ben might not have a fancy title or a big job, but he has a ton of influence. because of his knowledge, his connections, and his ability to spot what's good, what's fresh in the creative world.
So he's kind of like a curator.
Hmm.
He's shaping how people see value by highlighting certain artists and their work.
Exactly. And that influence, even though it's often behind the scenes, can be super powerful. It shows how important those informal connections are and how they contribute to the overall value of a creative ecosystem.
Makes you wonder how many other Ben Reviliuses are out there, quietly shaping the creative world through their passion and knowledge.
That's a great point. It reminds us that value isn't always created by big institutions or formal structures. It often happens organically through those everyday interactions and those networks of influence.
And that reminds me of the idea of third spaces. You know, those casual hangouts where people can meet up, swap ideas, work together? Rachel Granger mentions Copenhagen's Underbron as a good example.
Underbron is like the dream third space. It's a bustling makerspace where people come together to create and learn. But it's more than just a location, it's a community built on shared interests, trust, and a desire to make cool things happen.
I love that they encourage a doing, using, interacting approach. People are encouraged to experiment, get feedback from each other, which leads to some really creative problem solving.
It's like this real-life laboratory for ideas, and that's where those untraded interdependencies Granger talks about come into play.
Okay, what does that even mean? Untraded interdependencies.
Well, think about it. In a traditional economic model, you exchange money for goods or services, right? But in creative spaces like Underbrown, that exchange is less tangible. People rely on each other's expertise, building this network of reciprocity and shared knowledge. They're interdependent, but not in a way that's easily measured or traded.
So it's less about transactions and more about this web of interconnected skills and support.
Exactly, and that's where the true value lies. Not just the individual creations that come out of these spaces, but the community itself, that collective energy and knowledge that fuels innovation.
It reminds me of those old school industrial districts where small businesses were all clustered together, and their proximity, their collaboration was key to their success. But in this case, it's not just about being physically close, it's about shared passion and a willingness to experiment together.
Great analogy. And speaking of those traditional clusters, Granger's research also points out that models like the triple helix don't always fit the creative economy.
Okay, break that down for me. What's the triple helix model and why doesn't it work here?
The triple helix focuses on this relationship between universities, industry, and government as the main drivers of innovation. But, as we've seen, the creative world often operates outside those formal structures.
Right, because we saw how a very small percentage of creative practitioners in Leicester actually have those formal collaborations with local universities.
But remember, a whopping 76.9% of those creative folks are graduates.
So even if they're not directly working with universities, they're still benefiting from that education they received. And maybe those informal networks help connect those grads with opportunities in the creative world.
It's a good reminder that creating value in the creative economy is complex. There are so many factors involved, and it's not always as simple as those old models would suggest.
And that's why we need new ways of thinking about value. Frameworks that capture that dynamic interplay of social connections, cultural context, and individual creativity that really fuels this sector.
Absolutely. And speaking of cultural context, let's loop back to Malika Kramer's work on kente cloth in Ghana. Her research is a great example of how cultural and historical significance contribute to a textile's value.
The history of kente cloth is fascinating. It's not just fabric, it's a symbol of power, of tradition.
You got it. For centuries, only royalty could wear kente cloth, and specific designs and colors indicated their social standing.
So those restrictions, those rules about who could wear what actually made the cloth even more valuable.
Exactly. It created a sense of exclusivity, prestige. But it's not just about the history. Kramer also talks about how social relationships play a huge role in determining the value of kente cloth.
Oh yeah, she mentioned how it's often given as a gift during important life events like weddings and funerals. It's like a physical representation of those relationships and traditions.
Precisely. Those social exchanges, those personal connections, add another layer of meaning and value to the textile. It becomes more than just a piece of cloth. It represents relationships, traditions, a shared cultural heritage.
It makes you think about the objects in our own lives that we treasure. Maybe not kente cloth, but perhaps a family heirloom, a handmade gift, or something that reminds us of a special memory.
Those objects hold a value that goes beyond their price tag. They're loaded with personal meaning, connecting us to our past, our relationships, and our sense of self.
That personal connection, that emotional resonance, is a powerful driver of value, even in the wider creative economy. Think about the brands we love, the music that moves us, the art that inspires us.
It's not just about the product itself, it's about how it makes us feel, how it connects to what we value, what we aspire to.
Which brings us to another key theme of this deep dive, that push and pull between tradition and innovation, especially in the textile world.
Claire Lepinier's work on sustainable textiles gets right to the heart of it. She explores how we can preserve those time-honored craft techniques while also embracing new ideas and sustainability.
It's a tough balancing act, isn't it? We want to honor those traditions, the skill that goes into creating these beautiful textiles, but
We also have to think about the environmental and social costs of those traditional methods, especially compared to the often wasteful practices of the fast fashion industry.
so it's about finding ways to adapt, to incorporate new materials and technologies without losing the soul of the craft.
And that's where textile thinking comes in. Applying the principles of design thinking to the textile industry, it means considering the entire life cycle of a product, from its origins to what happens to it when we're done with it.
It's like taking a more holistic approach, finding a balance between creativity and responsibility.
Exactly. And it requires this shift in mindset, both for the makers and the consumers. We need to start valuing things beyond how fast and cheap they are, and consider the long-term impact of our choices.
It's about understanding the true cost of what we buy and the stories behind the objects we choose to surround ourselves with, and realizing that value can also be found in things like durability, quality, ethical production.
Okay, ready for another change of pace? Let's jump back into the world of online gaming for a bit and explore the concept of playber, this fusion of play and work in digital spaces.
I love that term. It perfectly describes what Tracy Harwood, Jason Boomer, and Tony Gary were getting at in their research on Let's Play Gamers. These gamers are so passionate about what they do, but they're also making bank from it.
And it's not just about making money, it's about taking something they love and turning it into something with wider value.
Right. They're building communities, expressing themselves creatively, contributing to a vibrant digital culture.
And in doing so, they're challenging those traditional ideas about work and value. Playber blurs the lines between leisure and labor. It shows that value can emerge in these unexpected ways through activities we usually think of as just fun.
It's a good reminder that we shouldn't underestimate the power of passion and community, even in the digital realm.
Absolutely. And now let's shift gears again and touch on another crucial piece of value creation, philanthropy and individual giving.
This is where Jenny Jordan and Ruth Jindal's research on the Leadership for the Future program in the UK comes in. Their findings show just how tricky it can be to get people to donate to the arts.
One key takeaway is that it's about more than just teaching people fundraising techniques. It's about changing those deep-seated cultural beliefs about giving to the arts.
Like how their research shows, many people in the UK still believe the government should be responsible for funding the arts, not individuals.
And that difference in perspective, compared to the US, where individual giving is much more common, creates real challenges for arts organizations trying to diversify their funding.
It's not just about the money, it's about building relationships with potential donors, showing them the value of what they do, convincing them that their support matters.
Building trust, being transparent, making donors feel like they're a part of something bigger.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk about the role of design and intellectual property in creating value.
Oh, that reminds me of David Heap and Carolyn Coles' chapter on silent design. They argue that we often overlook the contributions of those who aren't officially designated as designers.
Right. Their furniture factory case study shows how workers on the shop floor, quality controllers, even the folks buying the furniture, they can all contribute to design innovation just by doing their jobs, solving problems, paying attention to detail.
Exactly. It highlights how innovation can come from anywhere and that the value of an idea isn't always tied to a job title.
I still think about that chair with the misaligned jig. The workers found this clever workaround that actually changed the design, but it was never formally acknowledged.
It makes you wonder how much silent design is happening all around us in all sorts of industries.
And it raises some interesting questions about intellectual property, how we define ownership of ideas in a world where so much is open source and created collaboratively.
Definitely. The lines are getting blurry, and we need new ways of thinking about intellectual property that acknowledge the fluidity of ideas and the contributions of those who may not fit neatly into traditional roles.
We've covered so much in this deep dive. It's been amazing to see how all these different threads, from textiles to gaming to philanthropy, connect to create such a vibrant tapestry of value in the creative economy.
It really has been a fascinating journey. Now, let's take a moment to gather our thoughts and get ready to wrap things up in our final segment.
Wow. We really journeyed far and wide in this creative economy of yours, haven't we? From Ghana's kente cloth to those let's play gamers, my head is spinning with ideas.
It's been quite the adventure exploring how value is created, shaking up old assumptions, and even getting a bit philosophical along the way.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what stands out the most? What are the biggest takeaways here? What threads connect all the pieces we've explored?
Well, one thing's for sure, value in the creative economy is multifaceted. It's not a simple equation. It's about social connections, cultural meaning, personal satisfaction, and this constant dance between tradition and innovation.
And it seems like value can pop up in the most unexpected places. Remember those silent designers in the furniture factory? Or those case makers, those hidden influencers shaping the creative scene?
Those hidden networks, those informal relationships and exchanges are vital to the whole creative process. They fuel collaboration, spark innovation, and ultimately contribute to the overall value of the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a reminder that the creative world thrives on human connection, on shared passion, and a willingness to experiment to learn from each other. It's not just about individual brilliance.
It's a powerful message, especially as we move further into this digital age. It's easy to get caught up in algorithms and data, but value ultimately comes from people, their stories, their creativity, their ability to connect and build something meaningful together.
So, as we close out this deep dive, what's one thought you want to leave our listeners with? Something to ponder, a spark to ignite further exploration.
That's a good one. How about this? We've seen how creativity can blossom in unexpected places. So where do you see hidden value being created in your own life, your community? Maybe it's at a local makerspace, an online forum, or even those everyday interactions that make up the fabric of our lives.
What a great question. It encourages us to look beyond the obvious and appreciate the value being created all around us, often where we least expect it. And it reminds us that we're all part of this creative economy, whether we realize it or not. Our choices, our connections, our contributions all play a part in shaping this vibrant world. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of the creative economy. We hope you discovered something new, challenged your thinking, and maybe even found some inspiration for your own creative journey.
Remember, the exploration doesn't stop here. Keep asking questions, keep connecting with others, and keep creating.